I'm not a fan of MDF wall base, which is why I brought our tile in our master bathroom all the way down to the floor to have a perfect transition between the two. If you want to learn how we did it, keep on watching. Let's get started. Just a mere couple of weeks ago, our entire master bathroom looked like this. However, thanks to the remodeling process of removing all the existing tile, waterproofing it properly, laying down copious amounts of tile not only in the shower tub area, but along the entire vanity wall side as well. Of course, plenty of grouting was involved, but by the time I grouted as well as washed it down thoroughly, I realized there was a bit of a unique circumstance on the floor which I had to get creative on and think a little bit more deeply about. During the demolition portion of this project, I did remember that unfortunately I ran out of tile when I installed this flooring and we were a little short. We were able to get away with it because we had a significant amount of wall base along with the wainscoting that was on the wall, so that was the way we cheated at the time. Unfortunately, in this circumstance, we can't cheat, and I needed a way to fix it, so I got an idea. Let's see if it works. We have approximately a 1-inch gap between the tile floor to the wall, and in order to make this repair not only look good, but also have a cohesive look throughout the entire room, I'm going to be incorporating our wall tile. Now this same gap issue occurs on both sides of the room, so I'm going to make this same exact repair on both sides, and hopefully you all like it so much that you want to do this in your own bathroom. Now, it's okay if you don't, but this is a unique circumstance that I felt actually gave me an opportunity to be creative and different in this bathroom. In order to cut this marble flooring, I'm using my circular saw with a diamond blade, and I'm spraying spurts of water onto the blade just so the dust reduces. Now there is going to be continuous dust forming because it's not a continuous water flow, but I am trying to reduce the amount of dust that is being created during the cutting process. Of course, with this being a circular saw, I can only get so close to the tub and surrounding wall areas. So once I'm able to get as close as possible with our circular saw, I grab my grinder with a diamond cutting disc and use that to cut the remaining area all the way up to the tub. I do the same for the areas right up against the wall, but just keep in mind that you want to make sure you have proper eye protection, ear protection, and a quality respirator because you certainly don't want to be breathing any of this stuff in. Once that section was cut, some of it immediately came loose during the cutting process, but if need be, you can always take a hammer and pry it up from the underside while not having to worry about damaging the existing tile that will be staying. Also, if you're wondering how in the world my level is staying so perfectly still, all I had to do is apply some heavy-duty double-sided tape on both ends of our level, and that way my level was a perfect guide for my circular saw, and I didn't have to penetrate the floor because it was tape and I was able to just remove it quite easily. So with our notch cut out on our floor, it's now time to lay our beautiful tile into place. And as you can see, it fits in so nicely. And I think this is really going to be a nice transition between the existing tile on the floor to the wall tile as well. I think it's just going to look overall a very nice aesthetic. Hopefully it all installs correctly, but so far, so good. Now let's get this area prepped and ready for Thinset. In order to knock down a bit of those high spots on our existing Thinset, I take my oscillating multi-tool with a grout abrasive that has an abrasive pad on the bottom, which makes quick work of removing any of those high spots. I don't have to remove all of this Thinset because the flooring that's existing is actually thicker than our subway tile, and therefore I'm able to just build up that Thinset layer so both tiles are evenly on the same plane. As for Thinset in this application, I'm using a VersaBond, but the fast setting or fast drying version, because I am going to be applying a bit of pressure to the ones that are going to be placed on the floor immediately because I'm placing ones right above it afterwards. In order to have a proper Thinset bond in these applications when it's uneven terrain, I always suggest applying an even layer of Thinset on the base subfloor first, and then come back around with a notched trowel, apply your Thinset on the back side of your tile as you would normally do, but with the added bonus of knowing that no matter where your trowel marks lay, it's going to be laying directly into a bed of Thinset at the bottom. As I noted in my previous video, we're using 3 different types of shims on this project. Number 1 mainly is going to be this one, which is a rigid 1/8 inch spacer. These ones are 3/16 of an inch flexible spacers, and these ones are a unique wedge-shaped spacer. These rigid 1/8 inch spacers can also be embedded into the Thinset, which came in really handy with all the other tile that we installed on the previous video, but in this application I'm just using these for consistent spacers across our floor layout along with the remaining wall base. Eventually we will have to come to a point where we have to cut our tiles down to size, and that's at the tail end of this run. Very simple to do with a wet saw tile cutter, and that final piece fits snugly into place. With one side completed, I make my way over to the opposite side doing the same exact process, and keep in mind if you do like this tile or are interested in any of the products that are seen in this video, I do have links for all those items readily available in the description box below. With both sides of the floor tile fully installed, we can make our way back to the first side where we can finish up our wall tile. I double check our measurements, and once I have that measurement, I subtract approximately 1/4 inch, which gives us an 1/8 of an inch at the top and bottom for spacing. This is a bit tedious work since we're working on all 4s and we're trying to make sure that every single shim is positioned correctly. But with a patient mind, this is actually just more satisfying than anything, because as you can imagine, after installing so much tile on this project, it was amazing to see this statement wall truly come to fruition, and I know that all these small little details will add up in dividends in the end. However, while I'm on all 4s installing this side, I realize that I really don't want any MDF wall base in this entire room. Especially after I put so much time and energy on this one side, I can't just go on the opposite side and install some MDF wall base. So what I'm going to do is install tile wall base on this wall as well. I'm certainly not going to cut small vertical sections on the opposite side, however, but I do want those grout lines to be congruent in a stacking bond pattern. With our aluminum tile trim and our tile cut to the appropriate size, I'm able to position the aluminum trim in place while also embedding the first piece of tile right up against the wall. You might have to do a slight bit of maneuvering, but this side was certainly so much easier to install than the opposite side. As for the last and final side in this bathroom, I am going to be installing standard paint gray trim around our door, but I do want the consistent look of having this tile base all the way around. With all of our wall base fully installed, I let it dry overnight and come back to it the next day, because now we're ready to seal. Just as we did in part 1 of this video, we will be applying a high quality GE silicone wherever there is an inside corner. That's because, again, they are more prone to moisture at these locations, as well as movement over time and cracking, which is what would occur if we just used a standard grout line. So if this was a standard grout line, you would most likely see some hairline fractures over the years of use, and that could lead to water intrusion. For purposes of much easier cleanup, I am applying tape to any areas where I'm going to be applying this silicone to, because as you can imagine with a high quality silicone, it can stick to almost mere anything, so we want to make sure there's a very easy way to clean up all the excess. As I apply my GE silicone, you may notice that I don't have a smooth bead all the way across as I'm applying it. And that's for good reason. I'm not just a rookie at this, because I'm trying to fill that gap right underneath the tile, and it is a sizable gap, so you do have to apply a bit of pressure at every single 1/4 inch to make sure that that bead is fully sealed, so you never have to worry about a weak point within your bead. This floor transition really did turn out to be much more work than originally anticipated, because I was just going to install wall base, but I really did feel that these type of details within a project like this really makes this overall wall appearance stand out, and taking it past the DIY realm and into professional home remodeling aesthetic. Once our GE silicone is applied, because we have our tape in these locations, I'm able to use my finger and just swipe off all the excess and have a nice smooth finish around all these corners. At this point in time, it is a perfect opportunity to say a huge thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, GE. I've literally used their products for decades, and the fact that they personally reached out to me and wanted to be a sponsor on the BYOT platform meant quite the world to me, with the fact that I've known and trusted their product for so long. One of the main reasons why they're sponsoring the channel is because there is new and improved packaging. Same exact product, whether it's the old packaging or new packaging, but you might notice a difference in the near future whether you're purchasing from your local retailer or an online store. Key items to note is that their silicones are 100% waterproof, shrink and crack proof, water ready within 30 minutes, and their Supreme lineup is lifetime mold free guaranteed. If you want to check out their amazing product line for yourself, I created their own Amazon storefront on the BYOT page, so if you're interested, please check out the link in the description box below. With our silicone fully dry, it's finally time for some grout. And for our grout, we're going to be going with this sanded grout that notes the coloring as Arctic white, which is basically as white as I could possibly find, which matches quite well with our white silicone. As for application of our grout, I'm going to be using a standard rubber grout float, and as a general side note, if some of these images just look like they are not lit quite as well as I would normally do, it's because Seattle got hit by a massive cyclone, and therefore hundreds of thousands of people are out of power right now, and that's what I'm dealing with. But you don't need power to grout, so the show must go on. One other fun tool side note that I'll make sure is also linked in the description box below is that the light that I'm using is just my DeWalt drill. Yeah, there's a setting on the new XR drill by DeWalt where you can use the built-in LEDs into the drill, but you can set it for 20 minutes so the light doesn't turn off. Kind of handy even in these applications. With our tiles filled with grout, it's time for a sponge bath. Very standard and straightforward way when removing a sanded grout, much easier than trying to remove an epoxy grout. The epoxy grouts might last longer, maybe, but they are a tremendous headache to clean. So something as simple as a sanded grout like this is something that I always enjoy cleaning up, much more so than an epoxy grout. In order to keep our sponges as clean as possible, I bring in a second 5-gallon bucket. I wash the sponge out in one bucket and I dip the sponge into the second bucket, but I rinse that sponge out still in that first bucket. That basically provides you the least amount of contamination in the second bucket and makes the tedious process of removing that haze on our tile a little bit easier, which is certainly something that I appreciate. But now that we have our tile taken care of, let's get to some wall prep. After all the paint, all the beadboard, everything that was removed or applied to these walls over the last decade or so, I instantly realized that to try and bring these back to life, I need to go over this entire wall with a skim coat. But before we do that, I need to make sure we prep these walls so the drywall adheres properly before we get to muddy. I wiped down these walls quite thoroughly with a bucket of warm water and TSP, making sure that all that grease and grime is removed. And you may notice the fact that through the amazing process of video editing, I'm able to provide you a nice cohesive message on how I did the tile and then move immediately to the walls. Now, realistically, I did these approximately at the same exact time, but to make sure I had a cohesive message, I did the tile first and then did the wall prep second. Hopefully this makes sense, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comment section. Our walls at this point might be grease-free, but I do want to still abrade the surface because we're going to do a skim coat. And in order to do that, I'm just taking my sander with 200 grit sandpaper, putting it into turbo mode, and abrading the surface as much as I feel is necessary to make sure we have good adhesion between the wall and our skim coat. With our walls prepped properly, we can move on to our joint compound, and this is just a standard 5-gallon bucket of joint compound that's pre-mixed. However, because it was laying around for a little while, since I've had this for a little while, I do always add some water to it along with mixing it thoroughly before we get to applying it to the wall. I was recently seeing a technique where someone was applying a joint compound like this via a paint roller. I did try that. It did not work out as well as I had hoped. It was just too blotchy, and maybe if I had a thicker nap roller, then it would have worked better. But what did work out quite well was using a 32-inch skimming blade along with a joint knife. Now, I used the joint knife to apply our Thinset directly to the wall in areas where I wanted it, and once I had a sufficient amount of mud in that application, I used my skimming blade to go over that area. Now, I'm obviously not a professional drywaller because those individuals that do this make it look so easy and perfect almost near every single time, and it's just so satisfying. But from my perspective, as someone that does drywall work once every few months, this is as good as it's gonna get, and know that you can always sand it down smooth. So those high spots that you see there can easily be sanded down with our random orbital sander. Nice advantage of using the sander that I'm using in this application was that it has a turbo mode that I used to abrade the wall first, and then you can put it into a random orbital mode, which is much less abrasive, more along the lines of what we're looking for, because we're just trying to knock down a lot of those high spots and make the entire wall as smooth as possible. Once we're at an adequate level of smoothness, we can get to our drywall primer. And yes, I am making sure that a drywall primer is applied before we get to painting a latex paint, because if we don't, then we're going to have some peeling on our hands. Keep in mind that I had a unique circumstance here where I had to do multiple things at the same time and do them very quickly because I knew a storm was coming and was most likely going to knock out our power. If I didn't have a time restraint due to that storm, I definitely would have addressed the walls first before I did any of the tile, and that includes the priming and the painting. It's a lot easier to cut in those sections if I didn't have to go right up against that aluminum trim, but it really didn't take that much longer to do. It's just a little bit more cutting in than I would have liked in this circumstance. Once our drywall primer is dried, we can move on to painting, and for the color on this project, we're just going with a very neutral white color because of how vibrant our wall is. I don't want anything to subtract from the beauty of our tile, and therefore having a nice neutral white color on majority of these walls, I think is going to benefit us in the long run on this project. And as you may have noticed already, we have hit the massive cyclone storm of the century for Seattle, and our power is completely out for a matter of days. But that's the beauty about thinking ahead of time, because I always knew that I was able to do this portion of the project even without power, so it may be a little bit more cumbersome to take on the painting portion at this time because all the tiles installed. However, it was more advantageous to do it this way since I don't need power to paint. I also don't need any power to install a vanity, and luckily at this point, with the walls taken care of, we can move on to installing our beautiful wall-mounted vanity. Now, I did purchase this product online and it wasn't cheap. However, we really loved the look. The only problem is that once I received it, I realized there was this wood supportive channel on the back side that I had to cut into because our waste pipe for our sink needs to go all the way towards the bottom of our vanity because I want the countertop height to be approximately 36 inches tall. I always suggest applying some GE silicone to the back side of a vanity, especially if it's a wall-mounted vanity, because it provides so much inherent grip strength as well as not damaging the tile. So if we did ever need to remove this vanity for any reason, I still could do so without damaging the tile behind it or the cabinet itself. If I used construction adhesive, it would be a different story. So trying to figure out the best way to center everything. So I have a laser level that is positioned right on that mark. And then if you go up, it's centered on our light. So we are quite close with our plumbing, but luckily for us, we have a little bit of wiggle room. So we made it just enough. Now let's get it in. And if you're wondering, that is why I left the tape up on the ceiling, because now that tape notes exactly where our studs are below. So I can, no matter what, if there's tile on the wall, I can guarantee that I'm hitting studs all the way down here. When drilling in our first fastener, I'm using a multi-purpose drill bit. This drill bit can go through wood, metal, and of course porcelain. With our hole pre-drilled, I secure our vanity with a 3-inch long screw, double check our levelness, and then as long as the cabinet is level, I can proceed to pre-drilling our hole and installing the next screw. Each stud location receives a fastener at the top of the vanity, as well as the base rail location, and with all those screws installed, we have one extremely sturdy cabinet, and we're now ready for our sink. The sink is built into the countertop, and to make it a much easier process of installing our faucet as well as our drain, I flip the sink over and install the hardware in a much more comfortable position. If you've ever installed any faucets in your day, you know how uncomfortable it can be just to be inside the cabinet looking up trying to fasten it properly to the countertop, and in this circumstance it is a delight to install these in comparison to ways where I would normally install a faucet after the countertop is fully secured and installed. With our countertop in position, I can start reinstalling our water lines and make our way to our P-trap. Now the P-trap in this application is an unusual one because I don't have enough room to fit in a normal size P-trap. This is due to me wanting to increase the countertop height, and because I did so, I had to sacrifice the fact that I couldn't use a normal P-trap. In this application, we're using this unique Sink Genie P-trap, and it's actually an ingenious little device because the water flows from the sink down to the lower level, then that area floods and goes up to the top section of the P-trap. This basically just provides you more room on the bottom section of your cabinet, and therefore it still serves the same purpose by producing a water barrier between the sewer line air and the water underneath your sink. That way the stinkiness of the sewer line doesn't get into your house. With our bathroom vanity fully installed, I made my way up to our light. This light was picked out by my wife, and I like it. What do you think? My only recommendation was that the light had to have a black finish to it, but other than that, it was extremely easy to install, and just like everything, I do have links for all these products in the video description below. My best and favorite tip when installing a mirror for the very first time was to just take a piece of tape, run it against the back side of the mirror, make a mark where the mirror hanger clips are located, and then make a center point on that piece of tape between those two marks. That way you can line up your laser level exactly in the dead center of your sink, and then just drill your fasteners exactly where those marks line up on both sides. Luckily for us on this project, we did not have to replace the mixing valve on our shower system, so I was able to immediately find a style and aesthetic that I liked from the Moen lineup, which fits perfectly with the Moen mixing valve that we have in the wall. With our shower mixing handle installed, we make our way up to the actual shower head. The only key here is to make sure that when you're installing this shower pipe that you have plenty of plumber's tape on the back side and it's threaded in the correct direction. You can see here that I'm splicing the plumber's tape in one direction, and I'm also spinning the shower head in the same direction. That means that that tape is not going to come loose. It's only going to become a tighter, more secure fit. Our tub spout is secured down with a simple hex screw, and then a layer of silicone is applied around the entire perimeter with the same GE Supreme silicone that we applied around the perimeter of our tub. Of course, we can't have any clashing finishes, so I do remove the chrome version of our overflow tub spout and replace it with a matching black version. It's now time to make this a true bathroom with a commode, of course. With any new or reinstallation of a toilet, you always want to reinstall brand new fittings as well as a wax ring. The hardware around toilets always seem to degrade over time, and most wax ring kits come with new hardware in the box, so might as well replace that as well. With our toilet securely installed, we need to now seal it. Yes, seal it, the thing that we forgot to do when I installed this toilet 10 years ago, and therefore there was some disgusting nature underneath it, which is again why we want to have a proper high quality GE silicone around the rim that not only provides stability for the toilet, but also provides a very easy way to clean around the toilet with zero liquid intrusion underneath. The main thing I couldn't stand with this existing bathroom was all the miscellaneous finishes that were different finishes before. If I'm going to do a full bathroom like this, you're going to have to do all those small little miscellaneous items like a toilet handle. Again, very simple to install, but something that could have been missed if we didn't think about it ahead of time. As a nice finishing touch around our tile trim, I picked up this paintable Silicone Supreme product by GE, and this is not 100% silicone, which is very advantageous in this application because we do want to be able to paint this if needed down the road. Still 100% waterproof though, so keep that in mind. Having tile wall base was an added bonus over paint grade MDF wall base, but when it came to the door trim, I did go with an MDF paint grade trim to cohesively match what was existing throughout the house. At this point in time, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with these white walls because I could just leave them as is since the other walls are so vibrantly green and it really does blend nicely with the surrounding room. But if you have any suggestions with these white walls, let me know in the comment section. Of course, now we come to our infamous bathroom fan / light that my wife was desperately trying to get rid of, and since the finishes are not black in any case, it was fine by me to get rid of, especially after I saw how disgustingly dirty it was when I started removing it. Luckily for me, one thing I didn't have to do on this project was go into the attic to replace this fan because it was just top mounted with a few screws. So once I had the exhaust outlet attached to the attic vent system with some HVAC tape, I then started rewiring the system. Now, as a quick side note, I'm not an electrician, but this is how I installed the wiring on this project. This is definitely a mishmash of wires, but just keep in mind that all the whites go with the whites, all the greens go with our grounds. And then the blacks, actually, this is the unique one where we have a red wire here that's a hot one for the fan, and then the rest of the blacks are going to our black wire, which is our hot wire. Now these are for the light, so that's why we have to differentiate the two if we have a 2-switch outlet, which we do. I did plug in the fan to double check to make sure it worked before I started concealing the wires properly. Always good advice, since you don't want to install this entire fan and then realize something is miswired or something just came loose during the installation process, since that does happen occasionally since it's such an awkward position. Luckily for us, we nailed this the very first time and we can move on to our windowsill. Because the vanity cabinet definitely stood out with the fact that it was a white oak cabinet, I wanted to complement it with a white oak windowsill. Now I did have this extra piece of white oak lying around, so I just grabbed it and started sanding it down. Started from 120 grit and worked all the way up to 220 grit, and I mainly just sanded areas where it was going to be visible. Even the bottom side I did not sand because I wanted the area to be rough to the touch, since I was going to be adhering this piece to silicone and silicone alone. This is the clear version of our GE Supreme 100% silicone, and that will give us extremely good adhesion without any nail hole penetrations, which just makes this piece look even more beautiful and sleek. I left the weights in place for a few hours to make sure that the silicone was fully dried, and once dried, I can move on to applying some GE paintable silicone for any areas where our windowsill meets up with a adjacent wall. Now at this time I haven't applied a finish to our piece of windowsill as of yet, because I do want to be a bit picky on the exact finish that I choose, and I really want the natural aesthetic look of this white oak to stay and look as natural as possible. If you have any suggestions, let me know in the comment section. Our last and final item to account for on this project might be a little bit of picky one, but was something that I just couldn't stand, which was this overflow trim piece that came chrome. Yes, that does not work with the aesthetic that I'm trying to go for, with everything being black, and therefore all I had to do was scuff it up with some 220 grit, making sure that it was abraded, then applying a couple coats of flat black spray paint, then a couple coats of clear coat, let it dry overnight, then reinstall it the next morning, and we are now cohesively complete on this beautiful bathroom makeover. A lot of hard work went into this project, and something that I'm truly proud to say that this is our master bathroom, and something that I really take a genuine pride in, because it shows how we've progressed as not only a content creator but also as a home remodeler. Because if you want to see what the bathroom looked like originally back in 2010, yes, this is what the bathroom looked like when I first bought the home, before I was ever a content creator. Then I remodeled it back in 2011, and now we're to a point where we're truly happy with how this entire project turned out. I'm so excited. All the small minute details really culminates together between the vanity, the tile base on the floor. That transition is absolutely beautiful on both sides. And of course you can't forget the beautiful simplicity of a solid walnut windowsill. All this to say that I'm truly happy to note that this project is one beautiful, sexy beast of a bathroom remodel. Oh yeah,